Welcome to 2 plus 2 equals cabbage. In this video, we're going to answer the question, how do I create a Windows instance in GCP with Terraform? We'll go over all the things we need, including requirements for Terraform, the Google Cloud Platform requirements, prerequisites. We'll look at the networking components and security, and we're just deploying Windows for fun, so we'll have some fun doing that. We'll deploy it out there, test it out, make sure it works, and then we'll tear it all down when we're done and review at the end. Let's figure it out together. As usual, when we start our tutorials, we start off at the GitHub page. This is where we can find all of the sample code that we use for the videos. In this case, we're going to be doing the GCP deployment of a Windows instance, and that's here in the Terraform GCP base repository. All of the files we're going to be using in this tutorial can be found here. You can clone this repository to your local workstation, and we can work from there. So now we'll jump over to VS Code, take a look through the code a little bit, and move on from there. We are now in VS Code looking at the sample files that we pulled down from GitHub that we're going to use to deploy our Windows instance to GCP. Again, from previous videos, if you've watched any of them, the constructs are the same as far as files that we create and we use. The big difference is each cloud provider has different resource providers that we need to use and different terminology in some of them. In this case, starting off with main.tf, we've got our Google provider, GCP provider, a little bit more detail here. This is the actual credential file that we're using to log in. So it's pulling data from the TFRs file. And then requirements are a little bit different for GCP. We've got a project that we need to specify in a region, where in other projects, with other providers, the requirements are a little bit different. So that's the unique piece here for Google. Locals.tfrs, this is where we're specifying our naming convention. We're still using things like VM, SNet for a virtual machine and subnet, but in Google, it's a VPC instead of VNet or VCN, depending on the other providers. We've got our GCP networking where we're setting up our IP space. So we've got our VPC with our CIDR, and we've got the subnet that we've created. And then in GCP, it's called a firewall construct. In others, it's a security group, security list. So in GCP, they do call it a firewall. So we're naming this accordingly. Doing the same thing as before, we're allowing RDP into our Windows instance, and we're allowing that Windows instance to go out to the internet anywhere it wants to go, basically. Our Windows file, just as an example of something that's different, in OCI, we had a shape. In GCP, we've got a machine type that we've got to specify. We're still disabling the Windows firewall to make sure we can RDP into the device. And then we've got our Terraform TFRs template, where you will populate this and save it as the .tfrs file, so you can have all of your credential information in here. Like the other files, some of this is required, some of this is kind of random, like location and environment name. These are things that we've created just for help us in naming. In GCP, we need the project ID, the region, and the credentials file so we can log in, and then our public IP. So from there, we're ready to go ahead and start initializing the environment. We'll do Terraform init, and this will take a minute to run. So now the environment is prepared, ready to move on to the next step, which is Terraform plan. This goes through and validates all the files, make sure everything is there and is consistent, and it tells us what it's going to do. In this case, it's going to add 5 devices. And now that we're done with that, we can go ahead and apply. And this is actually going to do the plan, basically, and then it's going to apply it to GCP. We'll type yes here to continue, and this will just take a minute to deploy. All right, we're finished deploying, and we've got our usual outputs. We've got the public IP that we will use to RDP, and then we've got the private IP. Don't really need that right now, but we see that everything applied successfully. We've got 5 resources added. So since we deployed a Windows instance, we need to wait for it to boot up. So we'll give that a couple minutes. Let's go over to the Google GCP console and take a look at how things look in there. All right, here we are in the Google console, and we're going to just look at some basic things here like we have in the past. Couple different ways to navigate around. You've got the quick access buttons down here where we'll start. Otherwise, you can always find things under the hamburger menu. We're going to start looking at our VPC network. So we'll go here to VPC network. And we see here that our naming convention came over from our locals.tf. So we see our VPC. We can click on that. And here's a couple things we can look at. One, the subnet. We'll see the subnet naming convention that we specified. Tells us some more information about the subnet. Here's our /24 that we're using. Our Windows instance will be within that /24. And like I mentioned earlier, in GCP, we use a firewall construct. So we'll have our firewall rules here that we created. And that's all we really need to look at here. More to look at if you're curious, but for our purposes, we're just confirming that the information is there. So let's go over and we're going to go find our instance. So we'll go to the hamburger menu. We'll go down to Compute Engine. And once we're here, we can go to our VM instances. And the Windows instance that we created is here. Some information we can see right off. We can see the internal IP. We can see the external IP. If you hadn't copied this from the Terraform command line, you can copy it here. We'll use that to RDP into the device. If we click on the instance, we can see a lot of information here about the instance, things like the OS, status. We can also see some more parameters about, the networking is all here. Things we looked at under the VPC network, they all correlate to what's here. So we can see the VPC, we can see the subnet, IP addresses, etc. But the one thing we need to do here is we need to set the Windows password. So we will click the Set Windows Password button. You can create a username here or use the default. We'll use the default and just click the Set. This will give us a new password. We'll copy it off to a text file and we'll use it to RDP into the instance when we're ready. And that's all we really need to look at here. We just wanted to confirm that things indeed did get published into GCP. So what we'll do is we'll switch over and we'll try our RDP session and see how that works. We're ready now to try our RDP session into our Windows instance in GCP. So we've got our IP and we'll just go ahead and click connect. And put our password in there. We're in Windows. Let's open up the web browser and make sure we can get to the internet. And there we are. Everything seemed to work. So now the fun part's over, so let's go and clean up our mess. We'll go back to VS Code and we'll destroy what we created. We are right back where we left off in VS Code after we deployed our configuration to GCP. So all we have to do now is destroy our configuration, Terraform destroy. So this will go through and it'll make sure that it deletes everything that we created with Terraform. It won't touch anything that was there that Terraform didn't know about. So go ahead and hit Terraform destroy. Wants us to confirm, so we'll hit yes. And this will take a minute and everything will be cleaned up. Well, we destroyed everything we created. So we've done everything we wanted to do here. We went through and we talked about the GitHub, so you know where to go and find the sample code. We looked at some of the differences between the code and different cloud platforms. We deployed our configuration into GCP. We made sure everything looked okay in the console. Things were where we expected them to be. We tried our RDP connection into our Windows instance and everything worked okay. And then we destroyed everything. So we're back with a clean slate so we can move on to the next project. So we'll be doing some more videos with GCP, OCI, AWS, Azure, different types of things we can do there. So stay tuned for future videos. Thanks for visiting 2 + 2 = Cabbage. If you found this video useful, like and subscribe to show me there are people out there who would like to see more of this content.